Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Stephany.
And I'm Julia.
We're a mother and a daughter who love reading and talking about books, the ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Julia.
How are you this evening?
I'm pretty good.
Good.
Having a little bit of trouble with allergies, itchy eyes, itchy nose.
I'm sorry. That's not fun.
Spring is definitely in the air. Literally.
Yes.
It's literally in the air.
Yes. There is something so pretty about watching the white and the pink blossoms come off the trees with the wind.
Yes.
But I'm so sorry for you with the allergies.
And millions of other people.
Oh, yeah. I don't know the millions other people, but yes.
How are you, Julia?
I'm good. I'm back to work after PTO this week, so now I'm just all grouchy again.
Right.
But it's fine. It's getting hot, too, and I don't like the heat, so it's fine. It's fine. I'm fine.
It's always hard to go back to work when you've had some time off.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Yes. But it's all good.
We're here.
Yes.
We're here in the Book Snug, and that's always a good, fun thing.
Yes, we are. Well, what are you drinking today?
Oh, I have some chocolate mint tea from Stash. It's after supper, and I wanted something a little bit chocolatey, and I thought this would taste good. And it is. It's hitting the spot.
So a dessert drink.
Yeah, it's a dessert tea.
Thanks.
How about you? What do you have in your mug?
Kind of another dessert tea. This is Stash decaf chai. I think it's just their
Vanilla
chai. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I put some coconut milk in it because I didn't steep it long enough, so I needed something else.
Flavor.
Yeah. Well, today we're taking more of a serious route in our conversation. Easter has just passed, and with that also means the Lent season. Now, as Protestants, we don't typically do the full Lent experience, but it is still very important to us as we consider the sacrifices leading up to what Good Friday and Easter Sunday mean as Christians. In honor of that, we have decided to share some of our Christian spiritual life books with you, dear listeners, today. These are in no real order because trying to figure out an order or a theme for them was proving to be quite difficult.
Very, very difficult.
So just hear this as our recommendations, or rather the books that have been really impactful and meaningful to us in our journey in some way.
Yes.
So then what is your first book you want to share with us, Mom?
Okay, so getting to my first book, I'd like to talk about Blessing Your Grown Children by Debra Evans. This is probably the most specific book on my pile, written for a particular audience of which I belong. I am the mother of adult children. My youngest is 21, so everybody is grown up now. And I'm bringing this book to the show because my own personal experience has been that parenting adult children has been some of the most difficult experiences of my parenting life. And I think it's because there is not a whole lot of literature or wisdom out there. People don't talk about being a parent of adult children. And when I say parenting, I just mean being the person who has adult children. I do not parent you and your brothers the way I did now, the way I did when you were little.
Right.
This book talks about how to love your adult children, how to bless them and honor them while still maintaining your own boundaries and maintaining and standing firm in your faith, and also allowing your children to make the decisions they're making and deal with the consequences of those choices and decisions, good and bad, because they can be either or. And sometimes it even means watching your kids suffer through some difficult things. I found this book to be incredibly helpful and wise. And I think the thing that makes it so memorable for me, because I read this book several years ago, and I still think about a lot of the concepts in the book. The reason I think it was extra memorable is my small group, read this together. We're a group of 5 couples. We all have adult children, and we read and worked through the chapters together, and the discussions were so beneficial, and it was such a blessing to support each other through some difficult things that our kids were going through. This book, when I looked it up on Goodreads, has very few ratings. So it is a little known book, but I cannot recommend it enough if you are a listener who has any age grown child from 21 to 50. Like, I think my parents even would appreciate reading a book like this, even though they've had grown kids for decades. But this is my first recommendation. I just think it's really good, and I appreciated so much the insights from a Christian perspective.
I think what's really interesting about this book is, at least for me, I'm in the same place, but from the other end of learning how to have relationships with my parents now that I'm an adult, and seeing how things have changed. Now things are very much still the same.
Yeah.
And I remember right after I got married, how I didn't know how to navigate the new territory that I was in, because I wanted to be here at the house all of the time, but I also knew that I was building a new life elsewhere.
You were in a different stage of your life.
Yeah. It's weird. I'm not sure I like this just yet.
I find that I really like the part of parenting adult children where the relationship becomes more of a friendship focused situation, where we can talk like grown-ups and have grown-up conversations. And I really enjoy that. It's just finding your footing in where the relationship is, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And
I feel blessed that for the most part, your dad and I feel like you and your brothers are making good life choices.
Oh, good. That's good to hear.
Yeah. So that is at least helpful. But I know that life is life and things happen, and it won't always be like that. So I just feel like this book is a good resource. I feel like it's given me some tools to use, and I just really appreciate it. So that is Blessing Your Grown Children by Debra Evans. What's your first book, Julia?
So my first book, I'm a big fan of the Bible Project. And this one that I want to talk about is essentially, it's their coffee table illustrated summaries of the biblical books. The true name of this book, I don't know. I had to Google it a couple of different times to find the true title. The Bible Project is a nonprofit organization, I believe, whose mission is to create accessible and understandable, visually stunning videos on YouTube for those that are looking for Christ. So I have found the Bible Project to be really helpful for me as somebody who's been a Christian my whole life. Their video on sin gave me a brand new, profound understanding on what sin is and why it should matter to us Christians. And I could talk for a while about their videos. This specific book is their illustrated books of the Bible. On their YouTube channel, they have full breakdowns of each of the books of the Bible, and they talk through it. So it's by Tim Mackey and John Collins. I forget who is who, so please forgive me, but one is the Bible scholar and one is the graphic designer. And in these videos, so Genesis as an example, the graphic is unfolding as they're talking through Genesis. They talk about the historical context, the literary devices used. They talk about how the beginning of the book relates to the end of the book. Leviticus is a prime example. In their video of Leviticus, they talk about the 3 setups of the story of how the front of Leviticus is the same as the back of Leviticus and how it builds to the Day of Atonement in the middle of the book, which I never would have known. So their videos have been so helpful to me as I have begun my own study of biblical texts. And this book, this coffee table illustrated Bible is these books of the Bible, their graphic designs with their true explanations on it. So you can be looking through this book, look at these fabulous illustrations of each of these canonized books and have an understanding of what each specific part of the visual is meaning. Very, very good stuff. If you haven't taken a look at Bible Project yet or think it sounds interesting, I highly recommend. It is you could rabbit trail in their page for hours and hours and hours.
On YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful stuff. Educational stuff. They do tons of series as well. They have a great podcast. They also do a read through the Bible in a year challenge series as well, where it starts with the book of the Bible that you're reading. Ecclesiastes is a good example, but they do the video of Ecclesiastes, and then they do what is wisdom in the middle of reading that. Then they talk about other things, and they use other videos that touch on other parts of the book. So as you're reading in the scripture, you're getting all of this other information at the same time.
It's like a multimedia.
Yeah. Yeah. So good.
So your recommendations are really the
whole
YouTube
thing.
channel plus the coffee table book with
Yes.
the beautiful illustrations.
Yes. If you're looking for a visual way to get started in reading the Bible front to back, this is a good way to do it.
That's a great recommendation. I really didn't know much about the Bible Project, so I will
Mom.
have to check it out.
Yes, you will.
Because I'm very much a visual person. I appreciate beautiful illustrations. So I will have to look into that.
They are beautiful. Many of their videos have given me goosebumps and left me speechless. So they're fabulous.
Good.
Fabulous.
Great recommendation.
Yes. Well then, what is your second book that you would like to talk about?
We are moving from parenting to creativity.
Ooh.
And the book I would like to talk about is Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. If you have heard this name before, it's probably because Andrew Peterson is a well-known musician and songwriter in the Christian music industry. He is also the author of a very popular middle grade series, fantasy series called The Wing Feather Saga. I have the first book, but I haven't read it yet. He is also the co-creator of The Rabbit Room, which is a website online for creatives. It's a creative community.
Okay.
I have not checked that out yet, but I would like to. Adorning the Dark is his creative memoir. Specifically, he talks about his life as a singer, as a songwriter, a musician, and as an author, because those are really his creative outlets. He talks a lot about feeling like a poser and being extremely unsure about his talent, and not that he's unwilling to use it, but he's very hesitant. But he does, and even in being afraid to use his talent, he does, and he does it with the idea that he is honoring God with his talent, and he is showing God to other people through his music and through his writing. The subtitle for this book is Thoughts on Community, Calling, and the Mystery of Making. And I would definitely call this a mashup. It's a memoir, like I said, but it also has legitimate things to do to increase your creativity, to encourage you in your artistic talents. And I love reading books on creativity. I should say that straight off the top. And they don't have to be Christian focused.
Sure.
I loved Stephen King's On Writing. I thought it was fabulous. And that's not a Christian focused book, okay? Let's be honest. But I really appreciated his take on it because I firmly believe that we are made in the image of God. And part of that is our creative tendencies. Every single one of us has the ability to create something. And I think that comes directly from the fact that we reflect God's image. He is a songwriter and a musician, but this book can be applied to anything: writing, painting, any type of creative act. Adorning the Dark is, as the subtitle states, thoughts on community, calling, and the mystery of making. I would call this a mashup of memoir and how-to, basically for Christian creators or those who just want to create anything, even if it's for a hobby. It can be music, writing, art, craft, anything. It is one of the best memoir creativity books that I've read. And this gentleman definitely is in love with God. There's no question. And he views art as a way to help others see and love God. For Peterson, the best art is honest, truthful, and beautiful. And I agree. That's exactly what art should be. It should reflect the beautiful parts of this world. The book inspired me, it encouraged me, and made me hopeful about my own desire and my own need to create. And I do feel that need deeply. I love to write. I love to take pictures. I'm a photography person. I play the piano. I've tried recently crocheting, which I really enjoy. I cross stitch. And this book encouraged me to think of ways I can use my talents and my skills to point people to God. I want to read just one page in this book, just to give you the style of writing, because that's the other thing I didn't mention. Because he's an author and he is a songwriter, he definitely knows words. He can put words together on a page. And I've stated this numerous times already on this podcast. I love beautiful writing. So, of course, this type of book is really going to pull me in. Okay. Before I read this section, I need to tell you that he wrote a song. And in the song, the song is actually called Linnea, and it's the name of a woodland flower. Okay. It's a little flower. It's pretty. It grows in fields and in forests. And he talks about it here in this passage. So I'm just going to read this and you can enjoy it or not. It's up to you. This is what I want for you. I want you, dear reader, to remember that one holy way of mending the world is to sing, to write, to paint, to weave new worlds. Because the seed of your feeble yet faithful work fell to the ground, died, and rose again. What Christ has done through you will call forth praise from lonesome travelers long after your name is forgotten. They will know someone lived and loved here. Whoever they were, they will think they belong to God. It's clear that they believed the stories of Jesus were true, and it gave them a hope that made their lives beautiful in ways that will unfold for ages among the linnea that shimmers in the moonlit woods. This is why the enemy wants you to think you have no song to write, no story to tell, no painting to paint. He wants to quiet you. So sing. Let the word by which the Creator made you fill your imagination, guide your pen, lead you from note to note until a melody is strung together like a glimmering constellation in the clear sky. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor too, by making worlds and works of beauty that blanket the earth like flowers. Let your homesickness keep you always from spiritual slumber. Remember that it is in the fellowship of saints, of friends and family that your gift will grow best and will find its best expression. And until the kingdom comes in its fullness, bend your will to the joyful, tearful telling of its coming. Write about that, and never stop. So that's Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. It is a book that I will reread over and over again, probably.
And it's a beautiful cover.
Yes, the cover's beautiful. Yes. Absolutely. Yes, of course, if this cover's beautiful, I'm much more tempted to pick it up. Yeah.
That passage seemed like, it read almost like a love letter of like, this was my desire for you, and how can you not be softened by that?
Right,
almost.
Or moved.
Yeah.
Like, it just makes you feel like you want to pick up a pen and write something, or a paintbrush and paint something.
Right. And you used to tell me growing up that if I had an idea for something or suddenly felt a passion for something, that it must have come from somewhere.
Yes.
And to not dismiss it or ignore it.
Yeah.
No, I hear that much better now than I did when I was 15 or 16 or whatever. But I think it's definitely true that God is dynamic and has multiple characteristics to him. So why would he not be creative? I mean, he created the entire universe.
Yes. Yeah.
So why would we not honor our creativity?
That's a good question. There's no reason not to.
Yeah.
And there's really no reason to doubt yourself. You don't have to be Picasso.
Mm-mm.
You don't have to be Bach.
Mm-mm.
You can still make beautiful things and have an impact. You don't have to be world famous.
Well, make a joyful noise.
Yes.
A noise doesn't have to be sound. It can just be
Yeah.
your heart pouring out. And worship and creativity is worship. So make a joyful noise all the earth.
Okay. What's your next book, Julia?
Okay.
Where are we going now?
Places. The next book is Letters to the Church by Francis Chan.
Okay.
And I know this book, there are some people who I have recommended it to, and they have loved it. It's been very helpful to them. Then there are others who have read it, not under my recommendation, who have not heard what it had to say.
Or didn't agree with it?
Yes.
Okay.
When I found this book initially, I found it on audiobook because I was looking for background noise while I was trying to clean my room one day. Bad idea because I was promptly distracted and needed to highlight every single thing that was said in this book. So then I purchased my own copy. And Letters to the Church is, I would say, Francis Chan reflects on the state of the current American church and his heart for it, the American Protestant church. Right. I want to make that distinction. When I'm talking about the church, I'm using the capital C collective church, but not the Catholic Church. So this is his heart for the church, but also in relation to how spiritual texts talk about the early church and what is laid forth in terms of what the church should look like. And so it kind of goes through different things. I remember I don't have the book in front of me because a dear friend who listens to the podcast has my copy. I'm not going to call you up, but you know who you are. So I don't have it in front of me to reference all of my notes. But there is a point in the book where I remember he asks, why do other groups such as Judaism or Islam not advertise famous speakers or come to the mosque, we're going to have a big picnic day in order to get people to attend those services? Why do we feel the need to do that to increase our numbers? And I just remember thinking, that's really interesting. What are you trying to say in that? And there could be lots of reasons for those things, but I that was a point that I took from it.
So was he saying that was a good thing or a bad thing or just a curious thing?
I think he was trying to point out how some churches seemed to be relying on that for numbers instead of being the church. Or, and again, it might have been more in context in terms of like mega churches.
Okay.
Of making it look almost more showboaty instead of Christ-like.
So his concern is focusing on the numbers instead of focusing on people and bringing people to Christ.
Yes, that was this one example. And each chapter is a different topic.
I just wanted to follow along with what
yes.
what you're saying and what he was saying.
Right.
Okay.
I think I was just more struck by the comparison that he was drawing between our churches versus churches of other religions. That why do we need that, but they don't seem to. Mm-hmm. And then again, we're also not part of those religions, so we don't know what's going on in those behind the door conversations.
And I'm not sure those religions have a call to reach the lost.
Sure. Though we could make an argument about Islam, not the lost, but conversions.
Yes. That's true.
There was another really powerful comparison that he made, and I wanted to bring this up because of specific things in my life, and I'm going to have to speak pretty cloaked about it, so I do apologize if it sounds vague. My husband's ministry is to those that are written off as lost causes, as I think I want to say that.
Yeah.
And it puts him sometimes in very sketchy situations However, I know that he's in God's hands, so, and I trust, and he's going, whatever. I bring that up because in another part of the book, Francis Chan is talking about how he had made a friend with somebody who was in like a street gang. And this person was talking about how in this gang, everybody is a brother. You take care of everybody. You have everybody's back. If somebody calls and said, I have an issue, you were there in that minute, that instant, no questions asked. If somebody in that gang, if their wife dies, everybody takes care of the family. It's like a pack. Mm-hmm. Chan makes this point of how is that relating to the church? If some churches, if they're calling themselves families, why is it that some gangs look more like families than some churches do? The reason I talked about my husband at the beginning of this is because he's seeing some of this within his ministry. And within his ministry, there are some people who consider their ministry more church than the church that they attend because of those characteristics of family, of taking care of each other, of supporting widows or orphans, or being there for anything and everything. So whether the things that Francis Chan talks about in his book specifically applies to every church or not, I found it to be a really powerful reflection where the church stands and if it is becoming the bride that it's supposed to be. So it was a really good thought and reflection exercise. And I really recommend it to anybody who is looking to consider the church as a whole.
It sounds like he is being deliberately provoking, and I'm not using that word in a negative way, to get Christians, complacent Christians, to be thinking about what the church needs to be in this place and time.
Yes. And he's, throughout what he's writing, it's very clear that he is trying to do it from a place of prayer instead of anger, or trying to be very thoughtful with the words that he was writing. In the early part of the book, he mentions that he and some Christians had gotten together to start reading the book together on a Friday night, and next thing they knew, they'd finished Revelation 36 hours later, together, just reading it out loud. Mm-hmm. And then there were times that he was in Asian countries, and they were worshiping for hours and hours and hours on end. And somebody within that congregation asked him, what is worship like in America? And he said it's maybe an hour on Sundays. So he's not trying to be diminutive or shaking a finger in anybody's direction. I think he's writing truly from a place of a broken heart to see things get better. Mm-hmm. And again, I do also want to reiterate, he's not talking about specific churches. He's looking at the church as a
general view of the American church.
Yes.
So you're taking into account American culture.
And all of the denominations that fall within.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. What is your third book, Mom?
My third book is a book that I have reread a couple of times already. I read it first about 6 or 7 years ago, and then I just listened to it again last year. It is, I like this type of book because it takes the concepts of holiness and seeking God in your life and giving you actionable steps to practice this in your daily life and your daily activities. The book is An Altar in the World by Barbara Brown Taylor. Barbara Brown Taylor is an award-winning author. She's a retired professor. I think she taught for over 20 years at different universities, and she's an Episcopal priest. An Altar in the World is her gentle reminder that there is no spiritual treasure to be found apart from our bodily experiences of human life here on earth. So she believes that you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical, that it is holistic. Our spiritual lives are centered very much in our physical world. And she takes this book and she uses that quote as a starting point to introduce us to very specific ways that we can experience the holiness of God in the everydayness of our lives. So one of the chapters addresses walking and how walking can be a spiritual practice, how our work can be a spiritual practice. And when I say work, I mean like the work we get paid for, but also the menial work, like doing the laundry and washing the dishes and cleaning the toilet. If your head is in the right place, it can be an act of worship or an act of spiritual recognition. She even believes that taking the time to look the checkout girl in the face when you're paying for your groceries can be an act of connection and a spiritual experience. Like I said, I've read this book. I listened to it as an audiobook. She narrates the audiobook. And I always really enjoy, especially with nonfiction like this, when the author narrates the book and does a good job. And she does a good job with this. I did put a note in Goodreads for myself just to remember this book. And I wrote down that I loved how Barbara Brown Taylor overlaps the sacred with the mundane. And actually, she doesn't make a distinction between the two. And I think that's good and right. And I need the reminders that in my regular life, there is God. And even though I'm doing things that are just standard daily activities, they are filled with the sacred if I let them be that way. I'm going to read just a small part of this book too, just to give listeners an idea of the writing style. She says, to make bread or love, to dig in the earth, to feed an animal or cook for a stranger, these activities require no extensive commentary, no lucid theology. All they require is someone willing to bend, reach, chop, stir. Most of these tasks are so full of pleasure that there is no need to complicate things by calling them holy. And yet these are the same activities that change lives, sometimes all at once, and sometimes more slowly, the way dripping water changes stone. In a world where faith is often construed as a way of thinking, bodily practices remind the willing that faith is a way of life. So that is An Altar in the World by Barbara Brown Taylor. It's just a very comforting, very encouraging, very positive read. And I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you were reading, I was reminded of Colossians 3:1, where it just says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things.
Yeah.
Which is just a good reminder that, I mean, it's mindfulness.
It is. It's exactly what it is. It's a spiritual mindfulness practice.
Yeah. And I think definitely, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like days are getting fuller and time is going a lot faster. And so just the reminder to be still and pause and reflect, but then also to reflect on who God is, and that in any little moment, like doing the dishes, that it is still good and God is still God. Yes. So definitely really powerful reminders.
And he's with you in every moment. Even when you're cleaning the toilet.
Or cleaning a litter box or whatever it is. Yeah. Yes.
All right. What's your next book, Julia?
My next one is Jesus Among Other Gods, The Absolute Claims of the Christian Message by Ravi Zacharias. Now.
Did you know what I was going to say? Okay. Tell us.
I need to talk. I think it's important that before I talk about this book that we address what we need to address.
The elephant in the room. Yes.
I also saw Ravi Zacharias at Passion. And the year that I saw him at Passion, we had floor seats. And I remember seeing him on stage, the way that he talked so poetically and so logically about the Christian faith and the arguments that those outside of the faith present and how to put the things together. I was enraptured the entire time. Now, he does come from India, so a place where poetry and language is very important. And from that moment on, I was very much I don't want to say inspired or encouraged, but I was struck by how powerful apologetics could be. It was just a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
Shortly after he had passed, allegations came to light that he had sexually mistreated workers under his care. after he was a spiritual leader.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. And at the time of these allegations, I remember feeling heartbroken because that's not cool. But it was also at the same time where lots of other pastors were being accused of the same thing.
Yes, it was the beginning of the Me Too movement.
Right.
Yeah.
But then also Hillsong was being pointed at, and other churches out in California and some other Christian leaders were all being pointed out with allegations.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, okay, maybe this is just a grab, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew that maybe it was worth waiting to see what was going to come from things.
Mm-hmm.
The day that the investigation was reported, I read their report, which was completed by a third party, and it did conclude that the allegations were indeed sound. And I promptly cried because not so much I cried for the women. I think I cried for Ravi, but I think it was more that I had put somebody on a pedestal who did not deserve to be on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
And the next week at church, I was in a position of leadership, and those on my team, we took the time to talk about how do we as Christians process this information and what does it mean for us to take what he had said. So this book or his other writings or his other teachings, do we totally erase them and forget about them? Or how do we walk in stride with them with the recognition that he was still man and he still sinned and he still caused hurt and pain?
Right. He was still a sinner.
Yes.
Saved by grace.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, it was really powerful to be in a room of young adults having that conversation, as I think it's really important. That is, Christians my age are looking at being members of a church and go on to be older generations of a church at some point, that we have an idea of how to process through these conversations.
Yes.
Because we will be looked to at some point.
You will be leaders at some point.
Yes. I wanted to really have that conversation before I get into this book. And this book, Jesus Among Other Gods, takes a look at why the gospel is so different from the other religions, of why... How does Christ's sacrifice set him apart from the gods in Hinduism? Or what makes the idea of sin so different from Islam? I remember thinking that it made it very clear why Christianity was different. Because I think sometimes growing up, we know who Jesus was, and we know he died on the cross, and he rose from the dead. Yay, yay. But what does that mean in the context of all these other religions that are present on the earth for people to get distracted by? And I have so many notes in here. I did not have the time to pull any out, so sorry for that. In Ravi's way of writing, he makes it very plain and very easy to understand. But he does come at the perspective from apologetics, and apologetics is really... it's not defensive Christianity, but it's a logical explanation for Christianity or for themes and topics within it.
I think that's a good explanation.
And so I found this book to be a really helpful addition to my classes and my other readings in college. And it's definitely one I should go back to now that it's been several years since I was in college. I think if we're going to live in a culture or in a world where there's religions present and claim to be Christian, that we have an understanding of where Christ fits into all of that. And that is a much, much larger conversation.
It is, yeah.
But I think it's important for Christians to wrestle with and to talk about and to not necessarily have answers for, but be prepared to answer the question should somebody pose it to them. Okay, soapbox over.
Well, you were talking about Jesus Christ, and my next book, the last book I want to talk about, focuses specifically on the heart of Christ and how we can know it and what is his heart really for us. This book is a book I'm actually still reading. I have about 4 chapters to go. I started it in the middle of March. And after I read the first chapter, I decided that it was the kind of book that you should really take slowly. It's not difficult, but it's I don't even want to say it's dense, but the concepts are things that you really are going to want to mull over. The book is called Gentle and Lowly. It's by Dane Ortland, and the subtitle is The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. The dust jacket is beautiful. It looks like an early 1800s oil painting. It's a landscape with sheep in the front, and it's just pretty. But what Dane Ortland does is he is following the Puritan tradition of pulling a verse or a set of verses from the Bible and writing expositionally on just those verses and writing a whole book about that single set of verses and really focusing in on what they mean. So he does that with a set of verses, and the verses are Matthew 11:28 to 30. So I'm just going to read those so you understand the context of this book. And the verses are, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And again, that's Matthew 11:28 to 30. So he takes those 3 verses and he writes a book that's over 200 pages. And what he does is he picks the verses apart and he talks about the heart of Christ and that we are loved by Jesus. We're loved by Jesus. He is our friend. His natural desire is to bless us with mercy and love. That our sinful nature makes us want to not believe that we want to believe that he holds his nose while he's hugging us because we stink of sin. And he just barely manages to mete out the love and grace and mercy that he says he's going to do. But that's not true. That he loves us desperately, that his natural condition is to be, he wants to be near us. He wants to love us. He wants to show us grace and mercy. Very slow to anger, that he's patient with us. He's a mediator for us. He's our advocate. And I cannot tell you how comforting, how encouraging this book has been for me. I read about a chapter a day. If you looked inside of my book, it is just completely written up, notes over, underlined. I want to put this book in everybody's hand. It's just so wonderful. I think the heart of Christianity is really the love that God has for us. And of course, Jesus is part of the Trinity with God and the Holy Spirit. And Dane Ortland addresses Jesus, the aspect of Jesus, and then God and the Holy Spirit. The focus of the book is really on Jesus, but they're all the same. So they all, their natural condition is to love us and love us more than we can ever understand. It's just been a very heartwarming, affirming book for me to read. And I have been loving every second of it. And like I said, I feel like I want to press it into everybody's hands. Christians, non-Christians. I just feel like I need to be telling the world about the deep, deep love of Jesus. I'm just going to read a passage from the book again, because sometimes I feel like the writers sell themselves better than I can sell them. This comes from which chapter? Let's see. His ways are not our ways. It's chapter 17. But Dane is writing, God is infinitely compassionate and infinitely ready to forgive, so that it ought to be ascribed exclusively to our unbelief if we do not obtain pardon from him. He is unlike you. Even the most intense of human love is but the faintest echo of heaven's cascading abundance. His heartful thoughts for you outstrip what you can conceive. He intends to restore you into the radiant resplendence for which you were created. And that is dependent not on you keeping yourself clean, but on you taking your mess to him. He doesn't limit himself to working with the unspoiled parts of us that remain after a lifetime of sinning. His power runs so deep that he is able to redeem even the very worst parts of our past into the most radiant parts of our future. but we need to take those dark miseries to him. So that's Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. And like I said, if I had one wish right now, it would be that every single person in the world read this book. It would be a better place.
It definitely sounds more like a devotional style, one that you shouldn't read in one sitting.
Yeah.
One that you have to mull over and read it like a devotion, like early in the morning, and let it just stew.
Yes. And that's what I've been doing. I
Yeah.
have been reading it in the morning, and the concepts just continue to come back to me throughout the day. Dane Ortland writes with such care, and his love for Christ is obvious. And it's always a joy for me to read authors who have a deep love and respect for Christ. It makes my reading more enjoyable too.
Yeah.
Okay, Julia, what's your last book?
So up until this point, I have been doing, I would almost call it more educational style books, informative, to glean something from. This one is a memoir. And at the time in which I initially read it, I was moved by how good it was. But now that I've lived some life, I might tear up talking about it. It was not that was never part of the plan of this. This is Hope Heals, a true story of overcoming loss and an overcoming love by Katherine and Jay Wolf. I saw them at Passion again, another year, I think, and they have called the Hope Heals Foundation. I believe it's foundation. I don't remember. It's at least a summer camp specifically for those with, I think it's physical disabilities. I do not remember if intellectual or mental disabilities is included in that. I don't even know how to begin this story. I'll just read the back then. We'll just do that. With her 6-month-old sleeping in the next room, Katherine Wolf screamed for her husband Jay and crumpled to the ground. Her modeling career was just taking off in Malibu, California, and Jay was ready to take his final law school exams in a few hours. But those plans changed in an instant. On April 21st, 2008, Katherine suffered a massive brainstem stroke. She was rushed into microbrain surgery, where the neurosurgeon told Jay, "I need you to know there's a good chance she will not survive." As the sun rose the next morning, Katherine had survived the removal of part of her brain, but that's when the hard part began. And if you didn't catch it at the beginning, her baby was 6 months old. And the story is written, they take turns writing chapters. And it talks about their early marriage through to this incident and her recovery. And Katherine is she does not shy away from where she was of feeling hopeless and overcome with the grief of the fact that her life would never be the same, that she couldn't take care of her baby, that she was unsure if she was going to be able to walk. There was a period of time where she thought she was not going to ever be able to eat again. And because I saw them at Passion, I had an idea of what their voices were. And Katherine's voice is very, I want to pick a word that is descriptive but not mean. It is a screeching sounding voice and very abrasive. And only one side of her face moves. So then you have to listen very carefully to what she's saying. And the entire stadium, I think we were in the Georgia Dome, the entire stadium was dead quiet. But then when Jay would talk, and it's evident in his chapters as well, of how much he loved her regardless. And in the book, I don't remember, honestly, the scriptures that they used or the references that they used. I just remember this steadfastness to be supportive to her and everything. They went on to have another child, and how together they knew that just because this thing had happened in their life did not mean that God had forsaken them or that he had forgotten them. There is a picture, which they've included pictures in this book, but there's a picture where she is holding a wooden cross. So this picture, where she's holding a wooden cross. I know that that's when this is when she was still very much in her coma and on life support. And somebody had given it to her to hold, and she just kept holding it. And I know that there's a scripture that talks about an anchor, the anchor for our souls. Mm-hmm. And so the anchor has kind of become a symbol for their foundation. I don't know how to talk about this in a way that captures this story. There's one other book from that time at Passion that I think about a lot, but I come back to this story in particular because how true the words are that hope heals. It's so silly, but I'm frustrated about not being able to move, but I have to hold to the hope that someday
it will happen.
Yes.
You're not forsaken. God
Yes.
has a plan.
Or even in more vulnerable things that I haven't shared yet, of holding to the fact that nothing is big enough to knock God from his throne, which therefore means that hope is still very much secured for us. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I did that book justice in any way.
I think you did. I think it is a very powerful memoir about a person who could have easily given up.
Yeah.
And perhaps lived a very miserable life. And instead, she and her husband and their family are having a huge impact and moving people like you with their story. And touching the lives of disabled people as well. So, yeah, I think you did a good job.
Okay, good. Because I can feel myself getting a little weepy, so I think that's my cue to wrap things up. Fabulous memoir, but very difficult. Very difficult to read. So, what a downer for the end of our conversation.
I don't think it's a downer, though. I actually feel like you said, it's a very hopeful book, one that's filled with a committed love story and goodness that comes out of suffering and hardship.
Yeah.
Which it's not just Christians who go through suffering and hardship.
No, not in any way.
We just hang on to Jesus, hang on to the rock to get us through. Well, listeners, that is our little selection of spiritual or Christian focused books. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. It was a little bit heavier, a little bit more serious overall than we tend to go, but I feel like the selection of books was really good. Maybe you found a book that you would like to try. If you're unsure, I'm just going to push my book one more time and recommend Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. We always appreciate your presence, metaphorically speaking. And I hope that you will rate us or review us on Apple Podcasts if you're enjoying the show. And we hope that you will join us again in the next chapter.
We'd love for you to continue today's conversation with us at the BookSnug_podcast on Instagram and at the BookSnug Podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.buzzsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." And we wholeheartedly agree.